The Karcsi Identity. Written, directed and performed in 13 episodes by Jesse Rowe.
Chapter 8. The River. He needed to find a place to hide, to gather his thoughts, and make sense of the chaos that was consuming him. He slipped into the nearest bathroom, locking the door behind him. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, listening for any sign of pursuit. As Karcsi huddled in the cramped confines of the bathroom, his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The walls seemed to close in around him, suffocating him with a silent oppression. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Was it them? Or just a commuter on the way to work? How would he know? 2 silhouetted feet could be seen under the door. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white with tension, as he braced himself for the inevitable confrontation. If he was trained to kill prime ministers, some random bloke on the train is no big thing, right? Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe the photo was of someone else. Maybe Karcsi wasn't the killer, he thought. Was he a killer? Or just trained to be one but couldn't do it? So many questions. He could feel himself falling asleep again. He must not fall asleep. He mustn't! If he did, the most important bits will be forgotten. He had to stay awake. He had to remember. He needed a pen. He must write it down. But he had no pen. He would have to leave the cubicle and find a pen as soon as possible. He had no choice. With trembling hands, Karcsi reached for the door handle, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had to be ready, had to be prepared for whatever lay on the other side. As he pulled the door open, 3 shadowy figures stood in the narrow hallway beyond, their faces obscured by ski masks. Karcsi's heart raced as he faced his attackers, his mind racing. He knew he was outnumbered, outmatched, but he refused to back down. He would fight until his last breath if he had to. He didn't kill the Prime Minister of Bohemia, so right now he was innocent. He would have to kick some butts to prove it. In that moment, his eyes began to close. It was happening. He was swinging a punch, and suddenly things were fading away. But then, before sleep, a dream or a memory, he couldn't tell, came into his mind. A cabin in the woods, snow on the ground, 105 soldiers packed to the teeth with guns and knives, and the muzzle flashes of the guns shooting and creating a strobe. In the darkness, one small boy defeating them all, one by one. Was it a dream, or was it a memory? Either way, Karcsi believed in himself. He was back. Sleep did not take him. Not this time. With a primal roar, Karcsi launched himself forward, his fists flying through the air like lightning bolts. His first blow connected his attacker's jaw, sending him staggering backwards with a grunt of pain. But before Karcsi could celebrate his small victory, another assailant stepped forward, his movements swift. A knife flashed in the dim light in the hallway, its blade glinting menacingly in the shadows. Karcsi's heart skipped a beat as he dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly weapon. He could feel the heat of the attacker's breath on his neck. With a surge of adrenaline, Karcsi lashed out with all his strength, his fists a blur of motion as he fought for his life, their blows raining down on him like a hailstorm. He could feel the bruises blossoming on his skin, the pain searing through his veins like fire. But he knew in 30 seconds he would be back stronger. He had to hold them off, wait for rejuvenation, and stay awake. Desperation clawed at Karcsi's chest as he struggled to hold his ground, to keep the darkness at bay. He knew he couldn't keep this up much longer, that he was fighting a losing battle, but still, he refused to surrender, refused to give up hope. With a final burst of strength, Karcsi kicked out with all his might, sending his assailant stumbling backwards in surprise. Seizing the opportunity, he turned and bolted down the hallway. He could feel his body renewing. He could feel his strength returning. He could hear the shouts of his pursuers echoing in his ears, their footsteps thundering after him like a drum of war. But still he ran. running down the aisles and impatiently waiting for each door of the carriages to open for him. He fled towards the back of the train. As he reached the end of the corridor, Karcsi hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door handle. He knew what lay on the other side. Knew the dangers that awaited him in the darkness, but still he couldn't turn back now. He couldn't give in to the fear that threatened to consume him whole. But he did turn. He could see the three men at the far end of the carriage. Karcsi had one choice, but one choice alone. He knew he had to leave. The three men all ran at once to his end of the carriage. They ran at full speed. Karcsi had to turn and jump. Something was holding him against his will, but he knew not what it was. Suddenly a leg stuck out from one of the passengers on the train, out of Karcsi's view, and all three men tumbled to the ground. One stood up and looked at the owner of that leg, but the other two rose and headed directly for Karcsi. With a deep breath, Karcsi flung open the rear door of the train and leapt out into the night, the rush of cold air whipping against his skin like a cruel reminder of his mortality. He landed and rolled off the tracks. Moments later, and mere meters down the line, the leader of the three pulled himself to his feet and in the darkness took stern steps back down the line towards him. Karcsi looked down the line into the darkness. He could run for it, but the bridge was long and the man would only follow. Or could he jump? Jump? Off the bridge? Are you crazy? Well, he wouldn't follow you that way, he thought. The man took longer strides with arms crawling towards him, clawing, each finger outstretched. Karcsi ran, took one leap from the sleeper onto the track, and from the track onto the wall, and off the wall into the fearful darkness beyond. As he plummeted through the darkness, he looked back up and saw the shocked face of his pursuer leaning over the stone wall of the bridge, in half bewilderment and half amazement. Karcsi's heart was in his throat as he hurtled towards the unknown, but suspected icy river below. For a moment time seemed to stand still, the world holding its breath as Karcsi fell, twisting towards his fate. Then with a huge splash he disappeared beneath the surface, the cold water swallowing him whole. But even as he sank deeper into the abyss, he refused to surrender, refused to let the darkness claim him as their own. He struggled to the surface, gasping for air. The current was strong, pulling him downstream rapidly, and as he was swept along, Karcsi saw the snow-covered landscape rush by. Trees, rocks and the occasional piece of debris floating in the water. Karcsi fought to stay afloat, his movements frantic and desperate. He managed to grab onto one of the floating branches, which offered a brief respite as he caught his breath again. And again. But the river's current was relentless, and he was soon forced to let go and continue navigating the treacherous waters. Further downstream, the river calmed slightly, allowing Karcsi to regain some control. He spotted a muddy riverbank ahead and mustered his remaining strength to swim towards it. Exhausted, he finally reached the shore. The climb out of the river was slow, an arduous process. The man's baggy shirt was heavy with water, making each movement laborious. Once on solid ground, Karcsi collapsed for a moment, breathing heavily. He curled into a ball on the cold, muddy riverbank, trying desperately to stay warm. The oversized, borrowed shirt was now completely soaked through, and he could not hold back the violent shivering that racked his body. His breath, misting in the frigid air. The snow around him glistened under the pale moonlight, casting long shadows that made the night seem even colder. He tucked his hands under his arms, his fingers numb and stiff, feeling the cold seep deeper and deeper into his bones. His heart pounded in his chest, not just from the cold, but from the fear and adrenaline that still coursed through his veins. He found a dead tree. Quickly covering it with pine branches and making a bed and blanket out of dried leaves, he curled up again and went into a deep, deep sleep. He hoped tomorrow he would remember something. Suddenly, as the morning arose, the morning sun creeped higher and higher, he heard a noise, a rustling sound, faint but distinct, and with a burst of panic energy, he covered himself deeper and deeper with leaves and branches, over his head, over his body, over his feet, trying to blend into the landscape. His breathing rapid and shallow. As he listened intently, every muscle in his body grew tense